Hillary Clinton is declaring victory in the Iowa caucuses, but Bernie Sanders is not conceding and says he has some questions for the Iowa Democratic Party. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and get to our embedded reporter out there with Hillary Clinton in just a minute. But first, we want to bring in Lynda Tran and Leslie Sanchez, Democratic and Republican strategists who have been watching this race all night long, getting up very early for us. Thanks so much.
That's exciting.
Really exciting. Leslie, let's start with you. Big night for Cruz. How did he do it? Did he have a better campaign, or was he just more popular?
It's really exciting for Senator Cruz in the sense that his operation, his master strategy paid off. He had a strategy of really targeting evangelicals, people that turn out to the polls, putting that operation to work, and that works in retail politics in Iowa. There was a little bit of sweating in the campaign early on there when it was a bit more competitive, but overall, his master plan did produce, and all the data and micro-targeting produced. So I think one thing we're going to take away is that is going to be the standard for Republican and Democratic campaigns. It's really going to continue to be more sophisticated and to get out the vote efforts.
Lynda, let's talk about the Democrats. You know, I watched you last night here on CBSN, and you felt that though this was a tie, almost a virtual tie, Hillary Clinton won, that it might not be good enough for Sanders. And I wondered about that. I thought, well, he already sort of had lower expectations coming in, so maybe a tie is a win for him moving forward.
Well, as we talked about last night, it's not just about outcomes, it's also about expectations. And actually, I think the expectations were pretty high for Bernie heading into Iowa last night. All of the polls showed that it was essentially a statistical tie, as it ended up being ultimately. But also, he's had so much momentum behind him. What he really needed was to absolutely win last night. Everybody expects him to win in New Hampshire. In fact, the stakes are really high for him there. We'll see if he pulls out this sort of 20-point victory that the poll suggests that he's going to do. The problem for him is that these are just the first two states, and the election cycle is pretty long. And the map just looks a lot better for Hillary Clinton once you head into South Carolina, once you head into Nevada, and certainly into Super Tuesday.
Let's talk about the map for a little bit, because as we know, Iowa and New Hampshire are very different. In Iowa, we kept hearing a lot of the Republican candidates say, I've got the evangelical vote. But when it comes down to it, a CBS News poll shows that Cruz did capture 33% of it, but Donald Trump had 21% and Marco Rubio had 21%. So really, what do you make of that? I mean, is this saying that voters aren't just voting with their faith and that it is spread out, or there's just so many different candidates?
A little bit of both. I mean, you have Christian conservatives, social conservatives who are looking at voting more than just for the religious candidate, religious commander-in-chief. They would argue that they have a lot of other issues. Government spending became out of very important. Immigration, though, as much as we talked about it, was not as important. But the issues of jobs, economy, government spending, things that people are really frustrated about in Washington were really big motivators. I think what's interesting there is you did see Donald Trump get that evangelical support, had to do with those endorsements of Jerry Falwell Jr., had to possibly do with the support of Sarah Palin. Those were like the Palin effects, helped close that gap. Marco Rubio just really moving through and solidifying his support when people didn't have high expectations for him.
Well, let's just look at one other result when it comes to the late deciders. I thought this was really surprising. I mean, granted, we're talking about this for months on end, but for the late deciders, 28% went for Marco Rubio, 23% went for Cruz, and 14% for Trump. Could that indicate we're going to see something even bigger for Rubio in New Hampshire?
I think what really also indicates that debate performance when you saw a really good contrast between both senators. You saw Marco Rubio also having a big bump coming out of that. He looked very presidential. And people, when asked, who do you think can win in November, overwhelmingly were looking at Marco Rubio. So those late deciders, which was a big chunk, really started to build that momentum. It's what you're seeing Marco Rubio ride into New Hampshire. I think that was unexpected. So when you say what was the Trump effect, the fact that he took out all the noise and allowed for the signal to reach these GOP voters, I think that is really measured here.
I think we definitely have to talk about Trump. For the people in the control room, if you could set up SOT 15, but there was a lot of talk about how he sounded a lot more humble. I take issue with that description, actually, but you know, we're looking at the cover of the New York Post. It says crucified, but I wonder, the question really is it really the beginning of the end for Donald Trump? I mean, he's doing quite well in New Hampshire in terms of the polls. In fact, he's doing way better in New Hampshire than he was in Iowa. So are we sort of overstating
Well,
this,
he was trying to depress expectation at the very end. There was a lot of spin. Welcome to politics. I think one thing we decided last night is it just got a lot more expensive for Donald Trump. Now he has to actually not only write bigger checks, possibly raise some more money, but really get an infrastructure on the ground. He was riding the wave of the media limelight, and that really doesn't work in retail politics. And ultimately, what was so great, I think, about that last debate is you finally started to hear a reasonable, sound argument for what the GOP could look like without all these bombastic, kind of really caustic statements that the media loves to cover, but it doesn't get us closer to a commander-in-chief.
well, you mentioned the money. Where does the money go? I mean, it's going to get more expensive for Donald
To
Trump.
the Trump hotel, to the Trump restaurant, to the. Did you see his expense report? I mean, he's paying himself all the way down the line. I mean, do they eat anything
His
other than like the
plane.
his plane, his bottled water? You know.
But who else gets the money? Are we looking at Rubio getting it now after this versus, Chris Christie or John Kasich?
Right. Big thing that was happening as soon as you saw that Rubio rise is a lot of the establishment, big donors, especially bundlers, start coalescing and calling folks like Jeb Bush campaign, some others, and start to say, reduce the negative ads. And more importantly, if we want to win in November, we have to start putting our money around the establishment candidate that can win in November, that does have a good competition against either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. That Senator Cory Gardner from Colorado was already out making such bold statements like that. That's a big step.